Welcome back to the PT on Ice podcast. My name is Christina Previtt, and I am on faculty with the older adult section of ICE. I am super excited for anybody who is on the virtual ICE platform. We did our older adult part 1, Dustin Jones and I, on functional screening and why it's super important, especially with some of our older clients, to be assessing for overall function and physical function in older adults and not just working on those orthopedic injuries and zeroing in. And so today, for our podcast, I thought that I would piggyback a little bit on that concept and talk about physical capacity and why that matters. And so, when we're looking at physical therapy and we're looking at physical function in a lot of our clients, I think that, when we're looking at kids, when we're looking at children, we have these motor milestones. We know that, in that 10 to 15 month range, kids are a typically developing child is going to start walking. We know when they are going to start talking and when they're going to start crawling and when we can expect them to start rolling and having these physical milestones that they're going to hit. As we progress through our life, that functional trajectory almost creates like a fan where we have this huge span of physical function and physical capability where one person who is 70 years old can look so drastically different than another person who is 70 years old. And if we try to paint every person who comes into our clinic with the same brush and with the same expectations in terms of physical status, we may actually be setting off our therapeutic relationship on the wrong foot. Because if I have a 70-year-old who wants to compete in a marathon, and I've had that, morning Ryan, then trying to get them to be able to stand up from a chair pain-free is not necessarily going to be successful physiotherapy for them. And what we're also starting to see is, what these functional norms look like. Previously in the literature, when we were looking at research, we were doing a lot of cross-sectional studies or shorter-term prospective studies where we followed people at inception into the cohort at around 65 years old and followed them forward. We talked about last night that Australia has this 1,000 Norms project, and in Canada we have the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging, where we're bringing people into this cohort at middle age, 40 plus, and following these people over time to see what happens as they get older. When do we start seeing the accumulation of chronic conditions? When do we start seeing this slowdown in gait speed, for example? When do we start to see some of these impairments in activities of daily living or instrumental activities of daily living? And when are these transition zones where we, as physical therapists, if we can work with people at that point, can we increase their physical capacity and can we change their functional trajectory? Because I think it's really exciting to think that as physical therapists, we can literally change the physical trajectory of a person's life if we're able to work with them on different things like progressive strength training programs and environmental changes and just some of these modifiable lifestyle related conditions. And that's so huge. And so part of my PhD work is trying to figure out what we can do to identify people who are at risk for declines in physical function, but haven't yet lost their functional independence. And that, if we can capture those individuals, then kind of like the work that's being done by the APHPT, we can actually change people's independence and maybe keep them in their homes for longer, which has huge implications for the individual, but also has big implications for the population health perspective and the amount that we're spending in healthcare. And I know that, Canada and the US and globally, with our global aging demographics, we're starting to see that, these are the type of things that we need to be paying attention to. Okay, so when we're looking at functional trajectory and physical capacity, what are we doing and how are we starting to assess that? And what we're starting to see is that more and more older adults are, one, I talked about this last time, not wanting to be called old. They're not seeing themselves as seniors, and they're participating in sport longer than we have seen previously. And one of the records that is being broken more often is in that 50 plus, 60 plus age category. And so yesterday at the virtual ICE, we started talking about some of these functional outcome measures, and I wanted to go through a couple of them today. So one of them is a short physical performance battery. And this one's probably my favorite assessment that I use with a lot of my clients who are over the age of 60, because it takes less than 5 minutes to complete. I check for gait speed, which is one of the is called the sixth vital sign. I'll get my words right. And it's predictive of a lot of future declines and disabilities and gives kind of an idea of physical function around the community. So it's out of 12. The first part is a balance assessment. So we put people through a series of 3 different balance challenges, standing with their feet side by side. If they're okay with that and they're safe with that, for 10 seconds, we go into a semi-tandem stance. If they're okay with that, they're safe with that, then we go into a full tandem stance for 10 seconds. That would be a full 4 points. If we go into the second piece, that's the 4-meter walk test. You get a person to start at time or meter 0 and walk 4 meters at their usual pace, and we time that, and we give them a score out of 4. And then our third one is a 5-time sit-to-stand test. For people who are coming into your orthopedic clinic with pain, especially in the lower extremity, this may be a false negative or false positive in that the time that it takes a person to stand up out of a chair for 5 times without the use of your hands may be pain inhibited versus actually functionally inhibited. So you have to be conscientious of that when you're scoring an individual on this assessment. But it does give you kind of an idea of functional strength in a person over the age of 65, 70. So what we're seeing with physical capacity is that some of the things that we're seeing is with, for example, gait speed. We talk about gait speed as the 6th vital sign, that, under 1 meter per second is an issue with community ambulation because of things like being able to cross at a light safely and effectively before the light turns and cars start to travel again. But when we're looking at these measures, what we see is that usual gait speed stays relatively stable for people like without any orthopedic injuries and in a community dwelling older person until about the age of 70. So what we don't take into consideration sometimes is that usual gait speed may not actually be the best marker of community ambulation in a person who's slightly younger than 70, because it's just not sensitive enough to see some of these changes in physical function and physical capacity, and especially if they're in that subclinical phase. Something that you might want to use instead is fast gait speed. So something like going as fast as you can and trying to see how a person is doing. A little bit of a longer duration test, like a 400-meter walk test, and trying to go as quick as you can. You're getting some of that cardio aerobic capacity coming into that as well when you're doing a longer distance. Or a dual task. So what we're seeing is that usual gait speed may not start to decline until people are in the 70 to 79 age bracket. But if we start adding cognitive demand, like asking them to walk at a usual pace holding a glass of water, or subtracting by 3s starting at 50, the added cognitive demand of those tasks on top of usual gait speed, we're going to start to see some of those subclinical presentations and subclinical signs that there might be something going on. Okay, so if we're working with older adults, again, physical capacity is going to be super, super important. I know that if we're working in an outpatient orthopedic setting, it's really busy. And so short self-report measures can also work really well. In some of my doctoral work, I assess physical capacity through the Preclinical Disability and Mobility Scale. Basically, what it does is it asks a person 3 questions. Do you have any difficulty walking, I believe it's 3 city blocks? I think that's wrong. It's a certain distance. I haven't done this in a while. And then, do you have any trouble going up a flight of stairs? And do you have any trouble walking 400 meters? So around a city, like just a city block. So longer duration walk, shorter duration walk, and stairs. So if a person says, no, I don't have any difficulty doing that, then you go on to a second question. And this is the important part. The second question is, over the last 6 months to a year, have you noticed any change in XYZ? And it asks you, have you seen any change in the speed at which you're completing these tasks? Do you need an assistive device, which could be holding on to a stair railing? It could be that we just don't have the same confidence in our ability to perform stairs. So they use the railing, which is one of those first signs of issues with balance and muscular strength that I see in some of my older clients. Do you have more fatigue completing these tasks? Do you have more fatigue walking a kilometer now than you did 6 months to a year ago? And when we start prompting people with some of these more subclinical changes that our body is still able to compensate for, but is still an issue, then we start to be able to identify some of these subclinical presentations that we're going to start to address with some of our older clients. Okay, so when I start asking these questions, then we're kind of in this stage of preclinical disability, where it may not have reached a point where we're seeing issues with movement around the clinic, but we are beginning to show like these warning signs that physical therapists can begin to intervene at in order to start to see some of these functional improvements. So those are just 2 different ideas. The short physical performance battery is a objective test that you can place into your assessments. It's 3 to 5 minutes, not very long, and it tests multiple systems. The second one is a self-report measure called the Preclinical Disability and Mobility Scale, made really popular by Mina Manti. And these are 2 great ways to either objectively start having conversations about changes in different physical systems, as well as beginning to have conversations about things that we may be compensating for and create more physiotherapy-related goals for some of our older clients. Thank you so much for everyone who was on the virtual ICE presentation last night. It was so fun to talk to you guys about some of this functional screening. We have so much coming up in the ICE world that you guys need to make sure that you're paying attention to. Even on November 11th and 12th, we have Jeff Moore coming up to my neck of the woods and doing a course in Canada on the cervical spine. So I'm really excited that Canada is getting some love from the ICE community. And stay tuned. We'll see you later, guys. Bye.